It's Tuesday. You know what that means. It's yet another waiver wire show here on the ADP, the Average Dudes podcast. I am your Average Dude host, Matt Mormon. And we've got kind of a lighter week this week on the waiver wire. No real guys I'm looking at as like league winners or season long plays at either running back or wide receiver necessarily. We've been really spoiled for the first 3 weeks of this season with those guys. So a few more options though at quarterback this week. Definitely some tight ends that we can maybe try to get our hands on, get something out of, and some DSTs as well. Let's jump right into it with the quarterback position. And this week, I think you make a decent argument that quarterback is actually the position that I would put my top claim in. I think that speaks more to what's available at the other positions than necessarily does at quarterback. We're going to start with CJ Stroud. He's got Atlanta this week. He's been QB 13, 12, and 10 over the last 3 weeks. He's been excellent for you. He's voluming his way a little bit. Although the Texans, they're just letting him throw. And that's part of why Dameon Pierce has been so frustrating. The other side of that coin has been that CJ Stroud's been really nice for you. We've had Tank Dell and Nico Collins both emerge, and Stroud's part of that reason why. Also this week, the bye weeks, we should mention those. There are byes this week for the Los Angeles Chargers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Seattle Seahawks, and the Cleveland Browns. So there are some QB options that you've been using that are no longer available for this upcoming week. I think Stroud versus Atlanta is a great option to go ahead and plug into your lineup. Like I said, I think if you need a quarterback, I am perfectly fine using him as your top waiver claim this week. I would even throw a little bit extra fab on him this week because I do think he's kind of a season-long option for you as well. He's been really good so far in his rookie year. He doesn't look like a rookie out there. I'm pretty sure he still hasn't even thrown an interception yet. My second quarterback to pick up is Sam Howell, and this is more of just a streaming option. Maybe you don't prioritize him, but again, if you needed a quarterback, maybe you do a little bit more. He's got Chicago this week. They've allowed the second most points to quarterbacks so far this season, and he himself has been QB 11, 14, and 13 in 3 of the last 4 weeks. He did have that disaster QB 32 game as well. That's in the cards of a quarterback like Sam Howell, but his rushing should give you a little bit extra bonus production from him. And he's got those 2 receivers with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, although Dotson's kind of been struggling. Curtis Samuel's been emerging for him, though. That's the guy we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Joshua Dobbs of the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Cincinnati Bengals this week. They rank 12th in scoring against quarterbacks. They've allowed the 12th most points, is the way I probably should phrase that to avoid any confusion. He's been QB 5, QB 16, and QB 8 over the last 3 weeks. And he's even giving you a rushing floor as well. He's got 41 yards, 55 yards, and 48 yards in rushing over the last 3 games. Look, it's a little nasty. It's a little ugly out there. It's a little, you're not going to feel great. You're going to have the tight cheeks if you put Joshua Dobbs into your lineup. But at this point, again, there are a couple injuries out there, thinking of Joe Burrow. That's one that I'm really struggling on of if I've got Joe Burrow, and I do, is Joshua Dobbs actually the better quarterback in that game? I really think he might be. I really, really do. It's ugly for Burrow, and Dobbs has been pretty good. So if you've got a QB on bye, I would go ahead and put that claim in for Joshua Dobbs. I think he can get you through this upcoming week. Let's move over to running back. Running back, usually the headliner for the waiver wire each week. This week, not quite so much. I'm going to lead the way here with Jaleel McLaughlin. You may not even know who that is. He was the guy that emerged in some reports right before week 1 that he was going to get worked in for the Denver Broncos. It didn't really happen. All of us thought Samaje Perine was going to be the beneficiary if anything happened to Javonte Williams. And then here came Jaleel McLaughlin kind of leading the way after Javonte suffered that hip injury. Javonte not expected to miss much time, if any time. And so it's not going to be a long-term play here for McLaughlin if Javonte is out this week. And it does sound like he's likely to be out this week. Maybe you can get a game out of him. He is playing the Jets, who have allowed the 10th most points to running backs this season. He can be an option for you this week, but it is kind of a 1-week play, and that's probably all he's going to give you. I'm not real excited about it. The Denver offense is not one that's exactly the most high scoring, and does not lead to a lot of opportunities for running backs. But if you are in need of a pickup and play option, I think he's kind of the only option. Be sure to check your league, though. There are guys who I'm only going to mention guys who are more widely available. Each league is different, though. So go onto your waiver wire, sort by roster percentage. That's always a thing to kind of check on, just to kind of see who's out there. I tend to only highlight guys who are available in about 30% or more leagues. So go check that, and maybe there'll be a running back out there to help you out. If not, I do have a couple stash candidates for you as well. Chubba Hubbard, we've seen him get some use before in Carolina. He got quite a bit of use this past week. Miles Sanders is dealing with a groin injury once again after he suffered with that during the preseason. Deuce Vaughn is also just a name to file in the back of your head. Rico Dowdle suffered an injury this past week, which kind of opens up Vaughn to more playing time potentially, or be the guy even, as much as what he could handle at his small frame if something were to happen to Tony Pollard. Ronnie Rivers is the last name I want to mention at running back today. Again, just a stash candidate here. You may not even have room for him on your team, and that's okay. I just want to point out that he definitely looks like the handcuff for Kyren Williams. Kyren, not the most efficient runner on the ground. He had, I believe it was 25 carries for 125 yards. So actually, it's pretty good this past week. But Kyren Williams is also kind of a smaller frame guy. He's getting a ton of work. I do have concerns about him holding up with that workload for the entirety of the season. But we look for pockets of relevance, sometimes with these running backs. And I think there's a chance that Ronnie Rivers at some point this season has a pocket of relevance. On to the wide receiver position, and a little bit more exciting stuff here with Michael Wilson, the rookie wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. He had a nice big game in week 3 with 7 catches for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns for him. He is facing the Bengals along with his QB Joshua Dobbs. The Bengals are allowing the 6th most points to wide receivers this season. And look, anytime a rookie has a splash game like this, especially if it's kind of a guy in the top 3 or 4 rounds of the rookie of the draft, it's a guy to take note of. Rookies can always emerge and be big splash players for your fantasy football team. And Michael Wilson could be one of those guys. Again, no one this week that I'm really rushing out there for. I don't even think it's necessarily a bad play to not put a claim in on anybody and see if somebody gets dropped. I would prefer Quentin Johnston on my roster over all these guys at wide receiver, for example. Quentin Johnston being on bye, there's a chance he could get dropped if somebody's impatient or in a roster crunch. So there is a world where there's some leagues this week where I'm not even putting in a claim and hoping I have an earlier claim on the second round of waivers for those guys who do get dropped from teams. But Michael Wilson, he's my number 1 wide receiver to pick up this week. Again, he had that nice big breakout game with the 2 touchdowns. Up next is Michael Gallup. He faces San Francisco this week, which is annoying and frustrating, but he's really kind of emerging as the wide receiver 2 there in Dallas. Dallas's passing game, they told us they're going to run. They're told they're going to play a little bit slower, and they definitely have. So it's not the most productive wide receiver 2 that you can go find, but it is a guy who is stepping up and getting more targets. We've seen Michael Gallup be fantasy relevant before, although he never quite took that big leap that a lot of other people really wanted him to. He's been useful, though, at times, and I think he could have that usefulness again this year. This one's kind of a desperation play. This one's kind of a little bit of a gut call on my part. Rashid Shaheed for the New Orleans Saints. He plays the New England Patriots this week, and it's kind of a desperation play if you're going to pick a wide receiver this week, which, again, think about those teams that are on buys. The Seattle Seahawks, there's 2 guys who are in starting lineups every week. Same thing goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Cleveland Browns, you've been using Amari Cooper every week. And then also the Los Angeles Chargers, right? So there goes Keenan Allen, there goes QJ, there goes Josh Palmer, and you already lost Mike Williams. So there's a lot of wide receivers missing this week compared to normal. And so you may need a desperation, throw it up, and hope for the best play. I think Rashid Shaheed could be one of those guys. He had 7 targets last week with Derek Carr injured. He's been kind of a gadget player from time to time. He's an interesting player. He's kind of a gadget guy and a deep threat. He doesn't really do much in between. It's either long bombs or like handoffs and screens. And I think that those handoffs and screens, he could get some opportunities with those this week if it's Derek Carr. If they do make the change at Jameis, which I'm not expecting. If they do, though, we know the fantasy goodness that Jameis Winston can bring to his wide receivers. And this New England secondary is absolutely depleted. they're missing several corners at this point. Marcus Jones, Jonathan Jones, I believe, is also hurt. Both Joneses, I believe, are hurt. Christian Gonzalez just got hurt. Also, their top pass rusher, Matthew Judon, just got hurt. So this New England defense is definitely not one that scares me. Their position rank against wide receivers is pretty decent, but you have to remember they've had injuries since then, and they also had that rainy game against Zach Wilson and the Jets. So, when you're only 4 games in and one of those sample sizes is a rain game against the Jets, your position rank's going to be pretty good against, right? And so I think it is a defense to target with these wide receivers. For example, I am absolutely playing Chris Olave this week. I don't care what happened last week with one target. I'm also putting Mike Thomas in my lineup this week. And I think Rashid Shaheed could also come through for you. My next wide receiver to just take a look at, and again, these are ones that are very much, these are even behind Rashid Shaheed for me, but they are desperation options. Tyler Boyd, he faces Arizona this week. T. Higgins just suffered a rib injury. We don't know how long he's going to be out. But look, this Bengals offense just isn't clicking right now. Burrow's calf is ruining this offense. And we have seen Tyler Boyd be a short area target before, so that could actually be a good thing for him. But I would not trust it. I would not play it. I would not do it. But sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes you have to. And I think he could be a sometimes you have to option. Same thing goes for Curtis Samuel. He had 7 catches for 51 yards and a rushing touchdown this past week. They are facing the Bears on Thursday. You're facing the Bears, you might matter. Any Kansas City wide receivers who are out there, they are playing Minnesota. Minnesota has maybe the worst defense in the league this year. So those wide receivers out in Kansas City are definitely potential options for you as well. And Trey Palmer is a name I want to throw out there, and I would like to recommend him because of the Mike Evans injury, but they are on bye, so I'm definitely not putting a claim in on him. Again, maybe you would rather keep that claim and wait until Thursday or Wednesday rather and see who gets dropped to pick up in that place. But it is a guy who maybe I would add later on in the week after those waiver wires run, after things play out a little bit more. Maybe you have a player go out and you can move him to your IR in some leagues. Trey Palmer, just a name I wanted to throw out there and have on your radars a little bit, pending that Mike Evans injury. Tight end is actually not super ugly this week. After last week, I really didn't have much for you. This week, I feel like I've got 3 options here. Cole Kmet, he is at Washington on Thursday night. Washington is allowing the most points to tight ends this season, and he just had a 2-touchdown week. So go try to chase those touchdowns, I guess. It may not go well for you. You have to remember it is Cole Kmet, but his schedule is a little bit juicy coming up here. Next up is Zach Ertz. He is, again, playing the Bengals, who have a bad defense as well, it appears. They're allowing the 4th most points to tight ends this season, and he has been getting the targets in this offense. 10, 8, 2, and 10 through 4 games. Look, that 2's in there. That's always going to be a stinker on somebody on tight end. But 3 games with 8 or more targets at tight end is actually pretty useful. Zach Ertz, he's a sure-handed receiver. He's going to catch most of those targets. It's not going to be the most exciting stuff. He's not going to break any big plays, but this is tight end. It's not like you're really going to find a whole lot of guys who are breaking big plays for you. You're just kind of looking for some kind of production, some kind of hope. I think Zach Ertz can bring it to you. And I think Zach Ertz, as long as he's getting these targets, he might be a guy that can be in your lineup for a couple weeks. Another guy who is getting the targets and can definitely be in your lineup, he's probably my number 1 tight end among this group, and that is Jake Ferguson. Now, if you're looking for a season-long fix at tight end, I do think it's either Jake Ferguson or Zach Ertz. If you're looking for a streamer, I would go Cole Kmet, and that's probably because this week Ferguson is playing the San Francisco 49ers. But he did have 7 catches for 77 yards last week. He keeps on being a part of this offense, just like Dalton Schultz was. Dak is a guy who has long relied on his tight ends in his offenses, and it's coming through again with Jake Ferguson. Last but certainly not least this time around, defense and special team options for you. The DSTs I like this week. Washington, they've got that Chicago game. Chicago has allowing, I believe, the most points to DSTs this season. I do not actually have that one right there in front of me. I usually do put those. But Washington, in their 2 easier matchups this season, they came through for you. They had 12 and 9 in weeks 1 and 2 against Arizona and Denver. The last 2 weeks have been a little bit ugly. for Washington, but in those easy matchups, they have come through and played well and gotten you either double digits or close to it. The Houston Texans, this is actually kind of a sleeper defense for me. Back in the preseason, I'm a big fan of DeMeco Ryans, their head coach, and they've had double-digit fantasy points as a DST in 3 of 4 games this season. They are facing the Atlanta Falcons this week, and if you watch that early morning game on Sunday, you know that that's an excellent thing because Desmond Ridder is as good a candidate as anybody to throw interceptions on back-to-back plays. Next up is the Miami Dolphins. They're facing the Giants. Did you watch Monday Night Football? If so, you know why you're waiting to pick up the defense against the Jets against the Giants. And quite frankly, if you've watched any Giants game this year, then you know why. So they've allowed the 5th most points of DSTs, and that was actually, I wrote that down before last night's game. I would not be surprised if that's jumped up to like 2nd because they gave up 10 sacks and a pick 6. So definitely the Miami Dolphins are a defense to go target to stream in this week. Lastly is the Detroit Lions. They've got Carolina this week. They've scored 8, 16, and 11 in 3 of their 4 games this season. They do also have that -2 in there. But look, they've been hanging around defense, and David Montgomery is keeping that running game going, keeping that offense on the field. That helps too. Aiden Hutchinson is a great pass rusher. And again, that matchup, Carolina. Bryce Young just hasn't gotten much going so far this season. Rookie quarterback, tend to make mistakes from time to time with those. I think the Detroit Lions are a very serviceable option for you if you need to pick up a DST for week 5. So, guys, that'll do it for me here this morning on a Tuesday morning. Go get those waiver claims in. Go pick up some of these guys to help you go win your week in week 5. Hey, be sure to keep on following the podcast here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And, there are going to be times where I'm going to do exclusive stuff for each show. Kind of depending on what we can record, whether it's a thing where I go live for YouTube, those always then come over to the podcast form. I did one of those last week. There's going to be times where maybe it's just an audio recording. I'll put that just on the podcast feed. So be sure to keep an eye out on every channel and be sure to keep an eye on that Twitter page at ADP Dudes so you don't miss a darn thing. So guys, with that, I have been Matt Mormon, and I will see you guys later on this week. We'll have a miscellaneous show. I think I'm going to do Dynasty this week. I'm going to talk about some Dynasty trade targets for you. And then Tanner's going to have your starts and sits this week as well. So we'll see you guys later on this week for all that good stuff.